Welcome to the U.S.-China Global Education television series, presented by the Confucius Institute U.S. Center in partnership with the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. This 10-part series brings together presidents of universities and cultural institutions that host the Confucius Institute, along with distinguished American business, diplomatic, and educational leaders, to discuss the importance of global education, language development, and people-to-people exchange between the United States and China. My name is Tony Cully Foster, and I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Our focus is on global education, international affairs, and global communications. Like the Confucius Institute U.S. Center, we build educational bridges and advance international understanding between students, teachers, and professionals in the United States, China, and worldwide. We have a valued strategic partnership with the Confucius Institute U.S. Center. Their focus is on Chinese language development, global education, and people-to-people exchanges between the United States and China. It's my honor today to be here with my friend and colleague, Professor Gao Qing, the Executive Director of the Confucius Institute U.S. Center, who will introduce our program today.
Thank you, Tony. Today, at the Prestige National Press Club, we are pleased to have two distinguished speakers joining us. Dr. Victor Dzau, President of the National Academy of Medicine, and Dr. Samuel Stanley, President of Stony Brook University. Both are wonderful educators that share a background in medical and biological sciences. Dr. Stanley is the fifth president of Stony Brook University, which is one of the most prestigious American public research institutions. Dr. Stanley's global vision, which includes hosting a Confucius Institute, makes Stony Brook University one of the most important and popular places in the world for international education and academic collaborations. Dr. Stanley is a highly distinguished biomedical researcher and received his bachelor's degree at the University of Chicago, and then earned his medical degrees from Harvard Medical School. Now, let's join Dr. Stanley, who will begin this important dialogue.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Gao. Victor J. Dzau is the President of the National Academy of Medicine, NAM, formerly the Institute of Medicine. As one of the world's preeminent academic health leaders, Dr. Dzau advises governments, corporations, and universities worldwide. In addition, he serves as chair of the Health and Medicine Division Committee of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. He is Chancellor Emeritus and James B. Duke Professor of Medicine at Duke University and the past President and CEO of the Duke University Health System. Previously, Dr. Dzau was the Hersey Professor of Theory and Practice of Medicine and Chairman of Medicine at Harvard Medical School's Brigham and Women's Hospital, as well as Chairman of the Department of Medicine at Stanford University. Dr. Dzau has made a significant impact on medicine through his seminal research in cardiovascular medicine and genetics, his pioneering of the discipline of vascular medicine, and his leadership in healthcare innovation. His important work on the renin-angiotensin system, RAS, paved the way for contemporary understanding of the renin-angiotensin system in cardiovascular disease and the development of RAS inhibitors as widely used life-saving drugs. Dr. Dzau also pioneered gene therapy for vascular disease, and his recent work on stem cell paracrine mechanisms and the use of microRNA and direct reprogramming provide novel insight into stem cell biology and regenerative medicine. In his role as a leader in healthcare, Dr. Dzau has led efforts in healthcare innovation. His vision is for Academic Health Sciences Center to lead the transformation of medicine through innovation, translation, and globalization. Leading this vision at Duke, he and his colleagues developed the Duke Translational Medicine Institute, the Duke Global Health Institute, the Duke National University of Singapore Graduate Medical School, and the Duke Institute for Health Innovation. These initiatives create a seamless continuum from discovery and translational sciences to clinical care, and they promote transformative innovation in health. Victor, as someone who was born in Shanghai, raised in Hong Kong, and attended medical school in Canada and spent the majority of your professional life in the United States. How would you say your transnational background has impacted your worldview?
First of all, thank you, Sam, for quite an introduction. As Chinese, I think I wish my mother were here to hear that introduction. Yes. She finally said I'd do something useful.
Yes.
You know, my life's experience, born in China and grew up in Hong Kong, went to school in Canada and then ultimately United States, I think has a great influence the way I see the world. Most issues I see from a global lens, right? So I'm very aware of the interconnectedness of the globe, but I'm also particularly aware that whenever you think about work or whatever ways you do things, that you need to take into culture, tradition, and diversity of that in terms of across the globe. But the thing that I think you would agree with me is that at the end of the day, people are the same everywhere, same aspirations, same dreams. We all want to have, you know, the same issues. So that, I think, to a large extent, has influenced the way I look at things.
So my background's a little less cosmopolitan, but I did spend 2 years in Indonesia as a kid, and then had a remarkable time at medical school where I spent about 4 months at the Schweitzer Hospital in La Bourrée, Gabon. Right. And I think that really had a strong influence on the career choices I made. Tell me a little bit about what made you decide to become a doctor.
Well, so I was born in post-war China, and through the period of leaving China to go to Hong Kong in the 50s, early 50s, you know, I witnessed a lot of issues which related to that time, that era, which is poverty, the whole issue of lack of hygiene, care, so see a lot of illness. And that certainly has had a great influence on me. And it's, I think, my personal experience, my parents, my grandparents, they all contracted tuberculosis. Oh. At the time, as you know, being an infectious disease person, that was contagious, prevalent, and can be deadly. So that really had great influence on me, understanding, of course, about what should be done or how one sees the world. And of course, also stroke in my family. So those constellation of experiences influenced me very early, wanting to be able to serve and become a physician.
So you now have this remarkable position as the president of the National Academy of Medicine. Tell us a little about the National Academy of Medicine. What does it do?
Yeah. So the National Academy of Medicine is part of the National Academies, which is in fact chartered by Congress in 1863. And the time when Abraham Lincoln signed this, because they were looking for advice, independent advice, non-political advice around science and other issues. And of course, over the years, engineering and health emerged as the other two academies. So we're independent. We're not part of a government, even though we're chartered by the government. And the uniqueness is we work very closely with the government. We have trust. We've always used evidence-based, scientific basis for advice to Congress, to the U.S. administration, etc., and to the public. And our members are distinguished members, some of the most eminent scholars, experts in health, and even non-health area. We have economists, behavioral social scientists, because we are better by looking at all the different disciplines as we look at where the issues are that's ahead of us and challenges in health and medicine. So a lot of what we do is actually trying to make a difference in looking at health, medicine, science, and technology, what kind of recommendation of policy, what kind of recommendation for scientific directions. And so our mission is really looking at improving health for all through advancing science, accelerating health equity, and looking also at trusted advisor to a nation and globally.
So I've had the chance, I chair the National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity, right. Known as NSAB, and so we've utilized, obviously, the National Academy, and you helped convene a meeting for us, actually, as we were looking at this very important issue involving the safety of research conducted with biological agents and how to reduce the risks associated with that. And I think having the National Academy made a tremendous difference for us. Your ability to convene some of the best minds in the country, not just Academy members, they're spectacular, but also the credibility you give to a meeting that takes place in this area, I think was really helpful for us as we work to formulate a policy for the U.S. government. And of course, the notion of being independent politically is appealing too, to have a body of people who are really independent politically. So the Academy is doing great things. What is your vision for what the Academy role should be as we go forward?
Well, first and foremost, we have to stay true to our mission, which is trying to improve health for everyone through what I said, science, practice, equity, policy. And so we're totally committed to doing that. And so the issue is, how do we approach doing this? And so very early at my presidency, I said, look, we have really 3 priority areas to prioritize our work. One is, let's take on issues which are pressing, critically important, that needs answers and solutions. Second, let's look at advising the U.S. government and globally about the direction of healthcare. And third, let's inspire and lead the nation, being the Academy of Medicine and Health. What are the grand, audacious ideas? How do we train the future generations? So those are the 3 areas, and we followed true in many of the work that we've done the last 3 years in particular, that ranges from, now trying to look at opioid crisis as a major issue, to the Ebola outbreak and looking at global health risk framework. So these are critically important issues. We did one on end-of-life care, in which, because no government will ask us to do something like this, we take this on because it's so important. You remember the time of, death panel, things like that, right?
Yes.
So we took on what we believe are important issues, whether we're commissioned by the government or we actually did it with the foundations and other people's support. For the looking at where we're going in U.S. health directions, we launched a very big initiative called Vital Directions, which in fact had a nonpartisan group of experts, 150, to now create a framework by which we're now discussing with Congress and U.S. administration about, particularly time of repeal, what are the things to consider. And with regards to inspiration, I figure, look, we can bring together the public, the private sector, academia, et cetera, to take a big challenge. And the big challenge we find is aging and healthy longevity. So we've launched a grand challenge called Healthy Longevity. We also started academies, mainly elected academy members. We started a thing called Emerging Leaders Forum, trying to reach down to younger people to be involved with us. So those are the 3 priorities that we've worked on.
That's spectacular, and that's a vision I think that's very much needed in science and in healthcare, so I really appreciate it.
And of course, I put a global emphasis to all this work.
Yes. Yeah. So speaking of global, I want to return to issues around healthcare in just a second, but speaking of global, tell me a little bit about kind of the global outlook of the Academy, and particularly talk about China.
Yeah. So, we were originally founded as advisor to the nation. That, in fact, is in our charter. But it's very clear that we live in an interconnected world. And first of all, whatever we do here is going to affect somewhere. And whatever someone does elsewhere is going to affect us. So if you don't have a lens, a global lens, you are being totally narrow focused and miss the issue altogether. Secondly, there are issues globally, such as the infectious disease outbreak, et cetera, that, as you said, we can really convene great experts. And we can't sit on the sideline to say, well, it hasn't happened in the United States, we're not going to play. So for that reason, we have really shined a global lens in many of the things we do, and I think it's been very helpful. Now, before I came to NAM or IOM, we already had a lot of global activity. I don't want to sound as if I'm the one who brought all this there. Yes. However, we have taken on more than a good share of this activity recently in being willing to look at, for example, the Ebola outbreak. We just have a report on telling the U.S. government where they need to invest in global health, what are the areas for the future, for not only good of the U.S., but also good for globally.
So obviously the comments about Ebola, Zika now, SARS and MERS previously resonate with me, and I'm glad to see you taking a leadership role. I've talked a lot in my own work I've tried to do in thought leadership about the need for funds essentially to for the U.S. and globally as a fund essentially to be prepared for the next outbreak. I think one of the things we saw with Zika was a significant delay in the U.S. response based in part on the inability of Congress to pass legislation to make funds available. So we need to have funds available either on a global basis or certainly in the U.S. basis to help us respond.
There you go.
Just as you said so eloquently, these are global problems. Every infectious disease in the world is a plane ride away from the United States, and so we have to be prepared to deal with them. So I really appreciate your leadership on this.
I mean the realization that this is a security issue, right? First of all, the health issue is enormous, the number of people who can die from this, etc. But since it crosses borders so easily, what we saw in West Africa is a tremendous impact on the economy. People stop traveling, people stop, doing trade and things like that, and has huge impact. So we put together a commission a couple of years ago with the idea of, actually it was suggested by my good friend and protege, Jim Kim, who's a doctor who's now the president of the World Bank.
Former president of Dartmouth and now at the World Bank, yes.
Who used to work for me when we were at Harvard.
Yes.
And with Jim and the Rockefeller Foundation, Gates Foundation, et cetera, we actually work on a report about what needs to be done for the future. Exactly what you said. Preparedness, right? Governance, making sure that in fact there's enough funds at the WHO, and World Bank has created what they call pandemic emergency facility for $500 million, right? Yep. So that you can mobilize these fairly quickly. But the other two areas that we talk a lot about in that report is strengthening public health and health systems, making sure that the countries have really much better systems so they can respond to it, and finally the R&D. And what I'm really excited about the report is seeing at least having its impact. Not the only report, but for example, but there are others. For example, in the R&D side, we said you got to invest so much into vaccine development and R&D, and there's got to be a public-private partnership. And of course, we can't take credit totally for it, but as you know, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, CEPI, launched a World Economic Forum, which I was there. Yeah. And when we had the concept, then a year later, this past year, with Bill Gates and others launched it, is now on its way, raised $700 million, and ready to do vaccines to prepare for the potential outbreaks of potential pathogens. So this is what I believe that we can do to contribute to the global health issue.
Yes, and China obviously will play an important role in doing this for a number of reasons. One, obviously their economic strength, but two, some of the critical diseases have origins in Asia, essentially. So leadership there is incredibly important. We saw that in SARS and MERS again, where they were among the first to sequence, essentially, the genome of the SARS agent and help identify it. So this kind of international cooperation between our countries and between other countries around the world is going to be critical going forward.
China actually has played a really important role in global health, and so already I think at least in 10 years they've been involved with healthcare in different countries, Africa, etc. And then through my work at Duke University, we work very closely with Peking University and the creation of Global Health Institute, as we have. And of course, as you said, they play a really important role not only in terms of academic side, but from a government side, in terms of SARS, swine flu, avian flu, the ability to exchange information, surveillance, and work as a global partner is critically important. And of course, their science, of course, right now is really phenomenally impressive. So there's every reason to be recognizing the importance of China in the global arena.
So I'm going to return to some of those things in a second, but I did want to go back to healthcare, because the National Academy has been very, very important in terms of healthcare. And I don't need to tell you, for the past, since the election, essentially, healthcare has occupied the headlines in the United States as how we're going to deal with it. And of course, it's a critical part of the U.S. economy, but also viewed as a critical part of our budget deficit as well, from the spending. So, and for all we spend, the U.S. continues to lag some countries in a number of important metrics. So from your perspective, what do you consider to be the biggest challenges right now in healthcare and medicine, and what do we need to address those challenges?
I said earlier that I think people everywhere in the world are alike. I think everybody wants to have good health, right? So it's up to us, or the leadership, to do it right. Everywhere, as you know, as part of the Sustainable Development Goal, is to create universal health coverage. And China launched its reform in 2008, 2009, and created healthcare reform to get everybody covered in some way or the other. Well, I would say this country too has made a really important effort where we are today with the Affordable Care Act to expand the number of people who are covered in having health insurance coverage. And we're now 90-some% covered. I mean, you're reaching universal health coverage. You can't get 100%, but by 90-some%, you're reaching that goal. And the question is, what's ahead is the real issue. And as you know, here right now in the United States, there's a lot of uncertainty. I would say this way, I think that we all want the same thing, and which is access to health care, affordable care, and quality care. And we need to keep working on it. That's what we do a lot at the Academy. That vital directions I told you about is actually trying to create a framework of how to get there. In my discussion with Congress or with Secretary Price, et cetera, we want to lay out the roadmap. Whatever plan you have in coverage, you can't get to where you want to be unless you meet that. Now, from a global sense, of course, care is only a small piece of it. We recognize, my colleague Mike McGinnis at the National Academy of Medicine, he's my executive officer, wrote this very seminal paper to say, only 10% of care is determined by, of health is determined by health care. The other 90% are social, economic, and many issues, right? So when you look at globally, we're going to have to realize that these are the big issues we need to deal with. Disparities, social issues, economic issues, etc. The big ones, I would say, are obesity, diabetes, hypertension, non-communicable diseases. Huge. It's the #1 disease burden globally, and China is not immune from it. In fact, their diabetes rate is going up, the obesity rate is going up, and it's actually among the highest of the nations, right? Second, of course, is aging population, right? And I have reached the distinct company of the silver tsunami, and as we look at the numbers, right? I mean, as statistics says, right now we're looking at maybe as many as eventually 20% of our population is over 65, and yet 5% of population is under age of 5. So we're seeing a tremendous inversion of demograph. What do we do about that aging population, right? And it shouldn't be seen as a burden. It should be seen as an opportunity, because if you can make the people who are getting older healthier, they can be productive. There'll be much less demand on, resources. So we're going to have to address that. So that's the second one. Third, as you have pointed out, is infectious disease. We're still dealing with emerging infection, but if anything, we're dealing more and more. In our report, and I wrote in New England Journal of Medicine, we look at the number of outbreaks per year. We're getting down to, from 1 to 2 to 4, and it's only going to get higher and higher.
Yes.
Why? Because we have urbanization, we have deforestation, we changed our environment and climate. Animals and humans are living much closer together. They transmit diseases back and forth. And then we're globalizing, we're traveling, et cetera. So that's going to increase, and we got to get on top of that. And of course, then the other one is getting the appropriate antibiotics. And because we're seeing antimicrobial resistance going up, and as the O'Neill report says that, if we don't get on top of this, we're dealing with trillions of dollars impact in human lives. That's only a starting point.
Yes.
But I think these are the big ones. Climate change, also food. I mean, we're looking at global issues that the only way to address it is that we all work together to try to figure out how to collectively, as nations of the world, people of the world, work together to find solutions.
Many of the problems we face are extraordinary, but they require multidisciplinary approaches. We've had a good vaccine for polio since the 50s, and yet we haven't eradicated polio from the planet. Why is that? Because there's economic issues around vaccination, there's religious, cultural issues around vaccination, geopolitical issues that interfere with vaccination. And so we really need these multidisciplinary approaches. Climate change, those universities bring together the economists. Again, they bring together the social scientists. So, you've been at great universities, Duke, Stanford, and so I think it's, at places like Stony Brook, this is what we're trying to do, is really bring the disciplines together to tackle it. And the other advantage we have is being international. So,
yes,
we have the opportunity to collaborate with universities around the world. Stony Brook collaborates with 31 universities in China, for example. We have scientists and students who are going back and forth, and I want to return to that more in a second. But I think that is an incredible important piece of this puzzle, is worldwide collaboration and research. And I'm so glad to hear the academies again taking a lead in putting this forward.
And the other thing that we said earlier is, through this collaboration, you can actually become more effective. Why? Because if you don't understand the culture and tradition and to be trusted, so you're talking about eradication of using vaccination of polio, etc. I think that the days by which a government can say everybody must be mandated to do this to eradicate are limited, if not over. Right? And so how do you actually convince people it's good for them? Much better science communication, trusted. That trust issue is critically important. And when people are doing research, in vaccine, etc., that trust issue, right? So if we're not sensitive to the cultural differences and being able to work collaboratively across different countries, and being Chinese, I can tell you, there's still a lot of things that we need to work closely together to gain the kind of mutual trust and collaboration in order to be effective. So, as you said, multidisciplinary, but that includes social and behavioral issues as well. Many issues that we need to work together.
So I think those are, again, very, very important comments. And talk a little bit more about the notion of again, Chinese participation in these major research issues. So you talked about aging, diabetes. How do we work together so that the best practices in the U.S. and the discoveries in the U.S. are crossing more rapidly? Right. Are there formal programs we can do to help with these kind of things?
I think science and medicine should know no borders whatsoever, right? And the more we collaborate, the better it is. During the Cold War, actually, it was science that had the diplomacy. Diplomacy is done through scientists.
Yes.
Because, we wouldn't talk, China and U.S. were not talking to each other, or for that matter, Russia. So I think we as academicians, as scientists, medical, would need to continue to be sure that we open, collaborate, transparent, interchange, etc., which means that we need to work much harder in finding ways to communicate and exchange. Now, there's been a lot of now, as you can imagine, collaborations. Back in 1979, it was really important to start this whole idea of a protocol for cooperation, science and technology, and health and public health. But I think over the years, there's NIH and Chinese Academy of Science, collaboration, exchange, science, etc. There is FDA collaborations. But I think that we as scientists need to find a lot more mechanism. So about 2 years ago, a couple of my academy members came to me and say, this CRISPR-Cas9, human gene editing, but put in human is really getting to be a really important issue. We got to do something to kind of guide the product or the conduct of this research. Back in the 1970s, late 70s, there was a famous SULLIVAN conference on the recombinant DNA.
Yes.
Convened by National Academy. So they say we should do that quickly because we're worried about how people are going to use it in germline, in designer babies, etc. But we quickly realized we couldn't have done that alone. It can be a US thing. It's a global thing. Everybody have access to this technology, right? And it just so happens when we start convening discussion, the Chinese published a first paper on applying this technique on the human embryo, right? Very controversial. So it became very clear that this has to be an international effort. We need to talk to each other because what we say in US, what can or cannot be done, may have no implication elsewhere if we're not all making these kind of determinations together. So we invited Chinese Academy of Science and the Royal Society. So National Academy of Medicine, National Academy of Science, Royal Society and Chinese Academy of Science together, led by David Baltimore in a meeting that we had in December 2015, had a major international summit. Amazing, brought scientists from everywhere, 400 or 500 people talking about not only science, but ethics and application. And now we are continuing this trajectory. We just now talking to Chinese Academy of Science to have them host the next meeting. So we had a major report that came out that included 2 or 3 members of Chinese Academy of Science on that committee, as is from Spain and UK and elsewhere, to really look at how do we look at this issue globally. So it's a very good example that we can't be insular. Everything we do now has great implications. Unless we all come together, you know, Chinese having the largest population in the world, excellent scientists, now they're really doing a lot of cutting edge work. And of course, second largest economy, they have to be part of this conversation. And my own feeling is that US-China collaboration is so important, globally and for me personally.
I think universities have to continue to do this. I applaud what you did in setting up global health, and I think we have to continue to do this because, as we've talked about earlier, when it comes to planetary health and the issues here, universities, national academy, governments have to come together to tackle these problems because they're world problems. They're not US problems, they're not Malagasy problems, they're problems for all of us.
Well, you know, it brings me to think about 2 things. One is that the institute that we put together, like yours, is at university, not at the medical center.
Yes.
That's really important.
It is very important.
It includes the medical center. But what we observe is that the young people are so inspired by this, undergraduates, etc. You know, quickly, not only are people getting master's degree in global health, etc., we now have a major at Duke in global health. So we're now inspiring the next generation to understand about the global context and the opportunity to work globally and opportunity to do good and to learn from this. So I think kudos for you to think about this as a university-wide, and young students will have a chance to work over there, and presumably you have many other ideas to get them engaged. Second issue is technology. I do agree with you that lots of the solution would be innovation technology, right? And by the way, innovation goes both ways because we learn, of course, there are a lot of innovative ideas in under-resourced country that we can learn. Some years ago, I think it's about 7 years ago, when I was working with World Economic Forum at Davos, we launched an initiative on innovation in healthcare globally. Take a look at under-resourced country, and you can map all those innovations. Right? The famous one I'm sure you heard of is Rinvad Eye, which does 250,000 cataract surgery $1 a piece, right?
Yes.
I mean, things like that. How do you do that? And so now we are doing what they call reverse innovation, taking lessons learned from China, from Africa, from India, and say, in looking at US, cost is so high, how do we reverse that, right? And technology is another one, like, you know, using SMS text, etc. Now, there's a lot of concern for a lot of people to say technology may greater increase the disparity, right? Because if you can't afford it, you know, then those people who are poor can't have it. So how is that better? right? So there's a lot of this kind of work that we're doing in looking at how to enable technology to be affordable and having much broader impact versus technologies that are just going to create more and more devices and drugs which are so expensive that people can't afford it, right?
So I couldn't agree more again and applaud the efforts. I think bringing these groups together is absolutely critical for the future of all of our countries. And I see, as you have, the growth in science in China. And as you know, Dr. Tu Youyou received the 2015 Nobel Prize for research on physiology and medicine in an area that's, again, important to me, the development of new anti-malarials from ancient Chinese traditional medicine, which was spectacular. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Xian Yang, the first Chinese person, along with TD, to win a Nobel Prize, and the one in physics, was a Stony Brook professor. So he chaired the physics department at Stony Brook for several decades, and then retired from Stony Brook, and then left to go to Tsinghua University, where he serves now as a special advisor to Tsinghua University and a physics professor emeritus there. And it's been a huge boon for Stony Brook to have had Xian Yang essentially at our institution. And of course, he continues to advocate for strong science in China, but also for strong U.S. And Chinese collaborations. He's now, I think, 94 years old and as vibrant and vital as he's been. I saw him in China just a few months ago. Yeah, he's an incredible ambassador for Stony Brook and of course, for, as I said, for collaborations. Again, as you think about these Chinese and American collaborations. What about student and faculty exchanges? What's kind of your thinking about this at the medical student or other levels?
Yeah. First, on the issue of research, etc. Yeah. I mean, all of us are in awe what China is doing and has a very strategic direction going in life sciences at least, right? You know, 2 5-year R&D investment, 1,000 talent, training a lot of people into science and biomedical sciences. And of course, the recent genome of precision medicine project, it pales in what we're doing here. Yes. In 9.5 billion, 15 years, 100 million genome sequence. I mean, that's the scale, right? Yes. So I think that, you know, and of course the quality of work, you know, if you look at quality citations, et cetera, they are really way up there. So China is in a very different situation, and of course with the nascent biotechnology industry, it's going to be quite a powerful force. And we have a lot to learn from in the United States, in my opinion, right? Personally, for me, being a Chinese born, and I still consider myself as Chinese and American, this will be just great that we can do a lot more with them. I'm very lucky as one of the first waves of immigrants who Americans gave us an opportunity. Because now a lot of people are going back to China to, you know, continue and enhance. So I think we need to put aside competition and find ways to work closely together. And of course, it starts with students. Yeah. Your question of education. Yeah. Start with students. You know, when I was thinking back on when I first got to Canada, I was so intimidated. I didn't know how to take a bus. I didn't know how to do a lot of things. And it was because people who were so generous and gave me help that made me feel more comfortable at home. Over the summer or Christmas, the dormitories are dead, and I'm the only guy sitting there. And those days, I couldn't fly home. I mean, when I left Hong Kong, it would have been, we talked about maybe never see my parents again. I mean, it's real. And because I saw them 3 years later, when we have enough money to take a plane ride home, and we will have one phone call a year, 10 minutes, looking at the watch, international operator, and because life is so different these days. Yes. But I think it is that experience that's been so important to me, as a student experience of how people welcome me and provide me with the opportunity. So when you talk about education, I think that is the foundation, right? And what the Confucius Institutes do, and what you have done when you told me about over lunchtime, in providing these students with that sense of support and socialization is so important, right? It's so important. You know, it's not just learning the knowledge, which obviously is why they're here, but it's actually learning the culture and how people think, and also learning the socialization and creating that kind of bonding and good relationship that's so important.
So you've made a number of great points. Let me just augment one, because you asked about the Confucius Institute at Stony Brook. Founded in 2009, it's really been a center now of activity at the university. We have about 17% of the population. We have about 26,000 students in Stony Brook, and about 17% are international students, and 53% of them are from China. So I have at least 3,600 Mandarin speakers on my campus every day, and we're very proud to have them. And we're really glad they chose to come to Stony Brook. We want to make sure that their experience is as rewarding and successful as possible. Yeah. At the same time, we're interested in teaching more about China, because for the same reasons you've talked about, we think global understanding is very important. And being a global university is not just about us telling people about the United States, it's about us learning about other cultures, other countries, and so on. And that's very important, I think, to education. Yes. If our students are going to be competitive in the years coming forward, they have to be global citizens. I think it's absolutely critical. So at the Confucius Institute now, we've had about 2,000 students who've taken Chinese and learned Chinese from teachers at the Institute. We've had about 5,000 individuals participate in activities around the campus, and these can range from presentations, from art exhibits, movies, but also real educational activities as well that come out of the Confucius Institute. And it's been very important, I think, in helping create this kind of home for our students as well, where they recognize our commitment to their success, but also our commitment to globalization and to good relationships, I think, with China. Right. So it's really been, I think, a boon for us and makes a difference. That two-way exchange, I think, continues to be really important. I mentioned, you know, my travel abroad to Africa, which made a difference. I think our students have the same opportunities to experience this, I think, when they travel to China. And again, we want the students from China to have the same experience when they come to Stony Brook as well. And at the graduate level, of course, as you look at STEM, you know, this is a critical part of the students at Stony Brook University. We have a significant number of graduate students from China, again, doing outstanding cutting-edge work. We manage Brookhaven National Laboratory, so that provides yet another opportunity. It's the only laboratory in the Northeast. And again, that's another area where we've had significant collaborations with China, is in the areas of physics, and particularly nuclear physics has been a great area of collaboration. So I think all these things are really coming together. So
I mean, it's an entire ecosystem, right? It's both the pursuit of knowledge, interchange, but actually the pursuit of learning about culture and, as I call, sociability, you know.
Yes.
And really, I think that's what brings people together. If I were to think about my experience in going as an 18-year-old to another country to study, the things I remember more were the social aspects. I don't mean partying.
Yes,
I mean
I believe you. Yes, yes, yes.
I mean what people did for me.
Yeah.
Right? And because I learned along the way, right? And I think the idea that you're teaching another language is critically important, because the willingness to learn another language says a lot about the commitment of somebody interested enough in another country, another culture, another language to learn it. And so it's not just learning the grammar and the speaking or the writing. It's actually, as you do this, you begin to see how people express themselves so differently from each other, and understand the culture. And I think at the end of the day, it's a trust issue. When you really feel that you can trust each other, that's when you can really do good stuff together.
I couldn't agree more about language. I think it's hard to understand a culture without understanding the language. As you said, all the subtleties, humor, all of these things really depend on language. And I think to fully appreciate a people, you really do have to learn the language. And I think it's incredibly important to mutual understanding to do that. So
I think it took me a few years to speak American English.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
you do it very well, by the way. No, it's very good.
My kids tell me I still have an accent.
What about, so you know, every day I meet with students at Stony Brook, and many of them ask me about the career path I followed, which is a little unusual to go from being positioned and so on. But what would you give to Stony Brook students as they think about what they want to do in the future? Our international, our U.S. students, what advice would you give them?
I get asked that question a lot too.
Yeah.
how did you do this?
Yeah,
And what do I need to do what you do? I said, wrong. Right? Because I don't think that you and I designed our career pathway.
Not at all.
Right?
Not at all.
We said, I want to be a doctor. Then I want to be a scientist doctor. Then someone says, you're a good doctor, scientist, how about if you do some administration, lead something?
Yep.
And then I went and led something and then realized, oh, you know, I can make a difference by being a leader. Then, of course, as you are university president, presiding over the university, you see the huge diversity of things that you can bring together. And what influenced me, at least with the several, one is global health. Having my own background, when I first met Paul Farmer and Jim Kim, when I came from Stanford back to Harvard, you know, I met them. They was just starting their work on Partners in Health. And I worked with them. I created a division for them, and you know, got me really exciting. When I went to Duke, we started Global Health Institute. And it's been a great passion of mine and an opportunity to express the things I care about. When I was at Duke, being the university that hires most of the people in the area,
Yes.
being the health system that provides care for 97%, I started to say, wait, I got to get involved in my community. And I still am involved with it in so many different ways, education, housing, etc. And so it broadens you. So I never really planned the way I'm doing things. So when I did 10 years as chancellor, you know, IOM now, National Academy said, would you do this? I said, oh, well, you know, it's my chance to give back to the nation, which has given so much to me in the national level, right? And of course, we talk about global opportunities. I think the way I tell students is, don't overplan this. You can't engineer your career. What you ought to do is do what you love most. The good old word, passion.
Yes.
Right? Follow your passion, but you can't just be diffused. You gotta have to do a great job at this. And when you do a great job, new things will happen and new doors will open. And then it's up to you if you're feeling your passion, whether you want to continue or not. And certainly, like you, my feeling is I'm doing a series of things I love to do. I never gave up my core value, but now I can contribute more in a different way.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, I think. And I would echo what you had to say. I think for me, again, it's been a question of doing things that I really enjoyed and always trying to do my best at them, and then opportunities arise if you do that. And I think probably, and I know you did this, and this is why you accepted National Academy as well, is also the idea of having impact.
Yes.
I mean, fundamentally,
Making
can you
a
do
difference.
making a difference? Right. And so try and do things that make a difference. So pursue your passion, but try and find those components of it that really make a difference in people's lives.
And do a great job at it.
And always try and do the best you can, because if you do a good job, generally merit is rewarded, and you will be advanced. Not always, but generally that works out.
But you never thought that you would be university president, right?
Never thought I'd be university
president. You just want to be
president.
infectious disease doctor.
Infectious disease doctor, and then a researcher, and then I became an administrator, just as you said, because I realized I enjoyed helping other people achieve, and that's really the basis of administration, is helping other people pursue their dreams and achieve, and now I get to do that on a broader scale.
And there's so many dimensions to one's potential career. Let's say you're a scientist and you pursue science, but you know, if you think about this, we need people who are making decisions about policy to appreciate science.
Yes.
We need people who decide about where the science is going, decision makers. So, you know, we need more scientists to enter policy. Doesn't mean you need to give up science. You just kind of emphasize somewhat differently, right?
Right.
Education and communication.
Yep.
Right? All to find that discovery that makes a difference. I think there are so many ways. I think people need to follow what they're most excited about, their passion, and as you say, do your very best at it.
Yeah, again, you've hit upon a really important point, that there are multiple things that one can end up doing with that MD degree, with that PhD in science, and there are many ways in which you can branch out and have an impact. And we're spending a lot of time at Stony Brook now in this communication of science, and we have Alan Alda leading our Center for Communicating Science. Yeah, so that started at Stony Brook essentially, and Alan is training people around the country now, scientists, how to better communicate one with the other. So that's been great. So you've been an amazing communicator today. I think we've covered most of the things. Are there other things that you wanted to cover that we haven't come across in this discussion?
Well, you know, I just want to make sure we have a chance to reflect, you know, a lot of what we talked about, particularly as somebody where a lot of my memories are still, you know, in my youth in China or Hong Kong, and thinking myself as Chinese, but now really fundamentally American.
Yes.
And it's so important, in my opinion, for this country to recognize the importance of all this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the people coming from all different backgrounds working together, and both in this country and of course globally. And as Chinese, I'm so glad I have a chance to being interviewed by you, known about your work for a long time and great respect for you.
Thank you.
But also to discuss about U.S.-China. So when they asked me would I do this, of course, you know, given those opportunities, I would love to talk about this. And hopefully this may inspire, you know, some students, university, to all join forces in looking at the issue of U.S.-China and also the issue of global opportunities.
So Victor, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinary conversation for me. I've been an admirer of you and your work for so long. The international perspective you bring, I think, is so appropriate as we talk about Confucius Institutes, the relationship between the U.S. and China, and we put these huge issues around healthcare, around climate, and so on within the context of the work we're doing through the National Academy, universities like Stony Brook are doing. All of this, I think, comes together and is absolutely vital to our future. And you said it very well, trust. I think the ability of people to get to know each other and trust each other is very important. So thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you so much for everything you had to say today. And I look forward, hopefully, to resuming this conversation again over a beer or something else in the future, perhaps in China next time we both go. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The real focus of this program is to recognize 10 individuals who exemplify the mission of the Confucius Institute. And that mission is dedicated to the teaching of Mandarin, the development of additional cultural awareness about China.
We have 10 exemplary students representing the vast diversity of the students body of Confucius Institutes all over the country.
To all of the honorees tonight, congratulations. You really, really, really deserve it.
But it's not just your knowledge of the language and the culture, it's actually the special spirit that inspires you to do this. And these difficult challenges that you've overcome in order to keep this going really require a certain quality of person to do this.
If we in America are going to compete on the global platform, we need everybody in this room, and we need more than everybody in this room, to be able to feel comfortable in a different culture, in a different context. There are not that many people who really feel comfortable in a Chinese context, and I hope that each one of you in this room knows how lucky you are to have a Confucius Institute as a bridge. People need to relate on a human basis, and when you feel comfortable human to human, people to people, you're going to be a huge success.
My mantra, my number one belief is that there is nothing better than engagement. That's the way I live. If you are engaged in a common mission with the people with whom you work throughout the world, no one can stop you.
We need everybody in this room. We need all of you to take your language and your cultural aptitude and your interest and to combine it with whatever other skill that you're doing. I don't care if it's accounting, I don't care if it's PR, I don't care if it's medicine. Put the two together and help the world connect.
They are extraordinary young people, and I'm very proud to introduce them to you tonight.
Americans should learn Chinese because America and China are so connected in economy and trade, and in our daily lives, China affects a lot of what we do.
Having a strong relationship between these two countries is critical, and to do so, we have to be able to have these exchanges, and not just amongst the major leaders. It doesn't just need to be the presidents of both nations meeting. It needs to be the everyday citizens learning more about each other.
The East and the West both have different values, and both of them can combine to create something even more powerful.
Both countries can benefit from each other, and China plays a large role in America's economy and culture, so it would help them fully, if they learn the language, it would help them with communicating further.
Americans should learn Chinese just so they're not sitting in their little corner of the world.
We could solve issues a lot better together by working together and learning how to communicate together, as opposed to individually. So I think the sum of us together is way better than us individually.
Being involved in a Confucius classroom has really given me more of an understanding of not only a language, but a culture. And I've spent the past 6 or so years really immersing myself in Chinese, from the classroom to the field trips to the music to the people. And I want to major in international relations, and a lot of that is because of the experiences that I've had in my Confucius classroom.
I would just say, just jump right in and start learning, and you can do it, especially when you have things like the Confucius Institute behind you.
It's such a big world and such a diverse world, and there's so much that, at least for me, I don't even know what I don't know. And so by having educational cross-cultural experiences, I think it helps us broaden our horizons, it helps us deepen our understandings, and it helps us build connections with people.
Being able to visit China and speak to other middle schoolers entirely in Mandarin is something I never could have imagined a few years ago. It all happened because of my friends at the Confucius Institute at William and Mary College. I shared my experiences growing up in the U.S., and the Chinese students shared their experiences growing up in China. I asked them what they would like people in America to know about middle schoolers in China. Can you guess what all of the kids wanted us to know? Like kids everywhere, they all shouted out homework. They said that they have way too much homework and not enough time for social and fun activities. They seem to think that American kids just have fun all the time. This is not true, by the way.
So what I really want to do is raise my hand and raise a toast to everybody here, and to say thank you so much for getting it. Thank you so much for being part of this and understanding it, and to help us achieve what's going to be so important for the people that follow us.